Villains are some of the most interesting characters in media, mostly because we find them intriguing and out of our comfort zone. We spend most of our time trying to avoid those we find villainous, so when we encounter one in a book or a film, we are often drawn to the despicable and opposing way of thinking they might have or the actions that they take that we couldn't dream of doing. That makes them memorable, but also makes it very important that we get them right in our own story. Today, let's look at 8 of the most archetypal villains that we can see in many films and books and that you can use to have a stronger and more defined villain in your story. The psychopathic villain. This villain is often insane, or at least lacks empathy or remorse. They are psychologically fascinating characters, but are often the ones that unnerve us the most and are the hardest to empathize with. They are typically characterized by a neutrality or even enjoyment towards causing pain and suffering. Their motivations can vary from professional, like Anton Chigurh, to psychological, like Patrick Bateman, or some sort of twisted desire, like Norman Bates. The power-hungry villain. This type can often come across as quite campy, as they seem maniacal in their desire for power and control, attempting to expand that over as many people as possible. They may be a dictator or a tyrant, or just somebody obsessed with leverage and status. This type of villain is usually the type that almost seem to enjoy being stereotypically evil. Remember that power can also manifest itself in different ways, from politics, money, control, sexual prowess, and so on. More complex power-hungry villains can take on an ideological motivation, such as wishing to establish order as opposed to chaos, such as the agents from the Matrix. More classical power-hungry villains are the Emperor Palpatine, Lord Voldemort, Hans Gruber, or Joffrey Baratheon. The vengeful villain. This one is slightly self-explanatory, but they are a type of villain who is seeking revenge for some sort of perceived wrong. Often this can take the form of a fallen hero who has been consumed with their desire for revenge. They are quite often a good target for a redeemable character, but create a more complex personality that can attract some empathy from the reader. Think Killmonger or Raoul Silva. The chaotic villain. Again, the clue is in the name, but our chaotic villain is somebody who is motivated by anarchy, destruction, and chaos. They want to upset the status quo and bring about rapid and violent social, cultural, or personal changes. Remember that chaos doesn't always mean violent, though. Chaos just means upsetting the norm. Their motivations tend to be ideological in some sense, but not always. The Joker is a great classic example of a chaotic villain, but also any natural villain works here too, such as the dragons from Reign of Fire or the White Walkers in Game of Thrones. The ideological villain. This is another potentially sympathetic villain, who believes that certain unsavory means can justify their ideological ends. They are motivated by an unshakable belief system or ideology that conflicts with the hero of our story. They may be a religious zealot, a political extremist, or simply someone who holds different views. These tend to be less evil, per se, and more logical and reasonable. They tend to be the ones that we have to tell ourselves not to agree with. Think Thanos, Lord Beckett, or Tywin Lannister. The tragic villain. This villain is sympathetic because they have some form of tragic backstory or motivation for their actions. They may have been wronged themselves or simply have a misguided sense of justice. They are the type that we understand why they act the way they do, but empathize with them because they could be motivated by factors such as honor, family, or survival. Jaime Lannister, Magneto, Darth Vader, and Frankenstein's monster all spring to mind. The intelligent, manipulative villain. The clue is in the name again, but this type of character is one who uses their brain and deceit to get what they want. These are the hardest to pin down as evil, but they are often seen as immoral in the way they treat others or how they take advantage of other people's weaknesses. These are often the hardest to write, but some of the most complex and mysterious, and therefore some of the most interesting characters. Think Cersei Lannister, Hannibal Lecter, or Loki. The inhuman villain. Perhaps the least complex but simple and effective is the inhuman villain. These are villains who are, well, not human. Their motivations and methods are either above human ideas of morals or simplistic and natural. They are usually single-minded in their motivation, which can range from anything such as eating, assimilation, destruction, or resource. Examples are xenomorphs, demigorgons, the Borg, but this can be anything including viruses and meteors. So these are 8 archetypal villains that you can use as a starting point for your own. Remember that you can mix these categories together to create more complex and nuanced villains. Just don't get carried away, as most villains don't span more than 2 or 3. Good luck.